Hello and welcome to Hooting Mandrills. I'm Sam.
I'm Jeremy.
And today we are going to be delving into Magic's new foundations, the core set to end all core sets, the final realization of WotC's dream for a standard that or a modern that rotates and a standard that does not. The skyscraper from which Spider-Man's web will swing. But there are other formats besides standard and modern, and there's, in addition to Foundations itself and the starter collection, which a little confusing for people who aren't interested in limited, or who are interested in limited, but all standard legal, there's also a pretty big jumpstart release and a few special guest cards, and these will all be coming to Arena as well. There are going to be some of them. It's a huge release. Not every card is worth talking about, but there are some cards that are either maybe good enough or bad in an interesting way in Historic and Timeless. A few cards that are Pioneer legal but not on Arena yet. One card that looks like a Pauper card if you squint. So let's dive right into them.
So our first card is Thurid, Mare of Destiny for 2 generic and 2 white, 2/4 legendary creature Pegasus with flying and lifelink. Whenever you cast a Pegasus unicorn or horse creature spell, copy it, and the copy is a token. Other Pegasi, unicorns, and horses you control get +1/+1. This card has some fun text on it, copying every creature in your Kindred deck. Sounds like fun, but horses, Pegasi, and unicorns are not the strongest creature types that we've ever seen. And this card also is too expensive to be hit by Collected Company.
Yeah, it's very reminiscent of Crested Sunmare, another horse lord with very good text that just never matters. Next we have Brimaz, King of Oreskos, legendary creature cat soldier, 3/4 with vigilance. Whenever Brimaz, King of Oreskos attacks, create a 1/1 white cat soldier creature token with vigilance that's attacking, and it does the same when it blocks. It gets a little friend to help block. So, this is a card that you could look at and think is close to being there or almost there. It's similar to Eidolon or Anim Pakal, although it does have to attack itself. That makes it probably a little worse than those in a vacuum. And if you're looking to break the seal on Luris compliance to play a good 3-drop cat in your Ajani Pride deck, Arabo is probably just a better one for that sort of strategy, I think.
Right, and it doesn't create a token on the turn it comes down, like Adeline or Pelak. Pakal, I don't know how to pronounce that card's name, but yeah, those cards instantly, you don't have to wait for the value, whereas you do have to wait for and the same thing with Arabo, like if you have more than 3 mana on the turn it comes down and you can play another cat, then its ability works.
Arabo makes a token off of its own entry, his own entry probably. Whenever Arabo or
right,
another,
yeah. Sure. So like even if you play Arabo on turn 3, you still get the cat token.
Triggers your Guide of Souls. Makes your, if you have a Pride in play, it gets bigger and harder to block. And Arabo does a lot of things that you could, try to convince yourself are worth not playing Luris for.
We'll probably talk more about Arabo
when we get to the
set proper. But yeah, Brimaz, a cool card. Really tough to slot in Historic / Timeless. I mean, cats are incredibly powerful creature type, but
until they do something.
Since Modern Horizons.
The best, stupidest Modern Horizons card in Historic, less oppressive and timeless. It just happens to have a cat synergy in it. So moving on, we have Condemn. It's a removal spell. Put 1 white, put target attacking creature on the bottom of its owner's library. Its controller gains life equal to its toughness.
So a bad Swords to Plowshares, essentially. Your opponent still gains the life, but the card is not gone forever like a Swords type effect. I guess maybe since Swords is banned in Historic, this could see play in Historic. I think it's better than Path to Exile, because you don't want to give your opponent a land almost ever.
Yeah, that was sort of my thought, that it's bad Swords to Plowshares. Bottom of the library is basically gone forever in
Historic, where you don't really shuffle your library with fetch lands.
Yeah, even if you are shuffling, it's not in the graveyard where they can easily access it.
Sure.
Yeah, it's a bad Swords to Plowshares. It might be. It also has to target an attacking creature, which is the fucking worst.
Right, the attacking element makes it significantly worse, but people are playing Elspeth Smite and stuff already,
So yeah, if your control deck is interested in an Elspeth Smite or Path to Exile sort of effect in Historic, maybe you would play this over that. Mythic wildcards are free, so hey.
Alright, up next we have Generous Pup. Generic and a white for a 2/2 dog with Vigilance. Whenever one or more counters are put on Generous Pup, put a 1/1 counter on each other creature you control. This ability triggers only once each turn.
We also have an uncommon Urdnam Dromoka Warrior, a 1 and a white for a 1/1 legendary human warrior. When he enters, put a 1/1 counter on target creature, and when you attack, a target attacking creature with a 1/1 counter on it gains first strike until the end of the turn, or double strike if it has 2 1/1 counters. Pup is, I think, the better of the two by a significant margin. So the interaction between Aragorn cards like Tenacious Pup or the Ozolith and Aragorn Company Leader has been a pet deck in Historic of Jeremy's and mine for a while. It is always a little bit of a struggle, catches a lot of stray hate these days from Sun Cleansers and the like, which are rough on counters decks. But the power's here. We've got cards that do stuff. This Generous Pup curves with Tenacious Pup pretty well. You aren't just sort of sitting there between your Tenacious Pup hitting the board and trying to play the Aragorn. It does cute stuff with the other counters stuff. It's pretty good with Metastatic Evangel and Proliferate type effects if you're growing the whole team. Urdnam is a little overcosted for these, 1/1 put a counter on something effects are really more of a limited thing, but this is a pretty good one. Might be worth a copy. It's going to come down and just give something double strike a lot of the time.
Right. I mean, if you have Hardened Scales down, it's instantaneously giving something, maybe even itself, double strike, which is a powerful mechanic. But yeah, I think that these cards are really cool. There's a lot of 1/1 counter stuff, both in the proper foundations and the Jumpstart. It seems like Wizards is on a 1/1 kick across pretty much every color. But these seem like fun and pretty decent cards. Obviously, a little bit of a difficult time breaking into the Historic and Timeless formats, but interesting to think about.
Next we have Brigone, Soldier of Meletis. 1 and a white, 2/2 Vigilance, Heroic, put a counter on it, and it can tap. It has Vigilance and a tap ability. See how that works, new player that this is presumably targeted at, and it draws a card by removing a 1/1 counter from itself.
So, I mean, I guess I'll take over since I'm
You are the
prowess player
on the pod.
It's not as good as some tech we already have. I'm playing a lot of Boros in Explorer right now with Illuminator Virtuoso and also Emberheart Challenger. You know, as far as like, there's just like really very little room for this card, as Illuminator Virtuoso is the only card in that deck at 2 mana that I feel comfortable not having haste. If Illuminator Virtuoso didn't like solo every game by itself that I was playing, then, you know, like, it would be a tough decision in itself. Like, it's a very powerful card, but not having haste is a serious downside to any type of prowess heroic type creature. But yeah, this is a cool card, just not as good as stuff we already have.
All right, so next we have Eidolon of Astral Winds. 2 and a white, enchantment creature spirit, 2/4 with vigilance. And Constellation, eerie but nerfed to not work when you open rooms. Whenever Eidolon of Astral Winds or another enchantment you control enters, choose target creature you control. Until end of turn, that creature has base power and toughness 4/4 and gains flying. So this is a 3-drop, often the Kiss of Death in a format as powerful as Historic. But its text is real. It comes down, immediately triggers its ability, jumps something that you're interested in pushing through, and you get a big hit and whatever other trigger. Problem is the enchantment-specific synergy of things that you really want to hit with are also competing for your 3-drop slot. Talked about Fear of Ridicule in the Alchemy Duskmourn set review. If these curved, then there'd be maybe something there. Hitting with Fear of Ridicule is really good. There's Calyx from Aftermath, who is sort of around and also one of these 3-drops with enough text that you think it might get there, but hasn't really in any format yet. It doesn't compete as directly with Detective Phoenix for a 3-drop slot, because you usually aren't hard casting that, but Detective Phoenix is another sort of enchantment synergistic way to push through an attack that you want. So I was looking for things that this card was potentially interesting with, either things that you really wanted to hit with, or enchantment synergies, ideally both. Ocelot Pride remains the thing that you most want to get in with, I think, in the lower drop slots in Historic. There is that Crimson Vow uncommon, Mischievous Catgeist, Mischievous Catgirl. Got buffed. It got an alchemy buff. Its Disturb costs less now. It's just a curious cat. It disturbs out for a curiosity. So that's sort of an enchantment synergy. It's sort of a cat. Maybe there's like a blue-white cat brew that's interested in this, but I think that's just working really hard to not play energy.
Right. I think also the difficulty is you need to be both a creature deck and an enchantment deck, which, you know, kind of gets back into like a prowess mentality where you're like 20-20-20. I mean, maybe not because you're playing 3-drops, but, you know, that kind of thought process when constructing a deck. Obviously, there are tons of creature enchantments now, like Springheart Nantuko and FOMO and stuff that are quite powerful as well. But this thing is kind of funny on FOMO, but then you have to play all sorts of creature types, so sort of a difficult build around and a little expensive, but kind of a fun card, I think, still.
And next, I was pretty high. You might remember on I must have been pretty high because the deck has not been that good on a Walls deck when we talked about Fear of Change in the Duskmourn Alchemy set review. And we have another card that is interested in butts. Plagon, Lord of the Beach. 2 and a blue, 0/3, legendary starfish wizard. I don't know if that's a butt joke. Please don't be mad at me, wizards, for saying it might be a butt joke.
I mean, what is this anime art on? Like, whatever this thing is for weebs.
Yeah, there are a bunch like that in the Jumpstart. Brigone was also, but so when Plagon enters, draw a card for each each creature you control with toughness greater than its power. So if one of your other shitty walls lived in the curve out to playing this card, if your opponent did not decide that your Wall of Blossoms was worth removing instantly once it had already gotten its value, this card is going to draw you probably 2, maybe more cards when it enters. That's pretty good. It costs 3 mana, but you're playing Overgrown Battlement. You can probably afford that. It puts a butt into play to help you get there on Pride of Hullclade. And it has an activated ability for blue or a white. Target creature you control assigns combat damage equal to its toughness rather than its power this turn. It doesn't have the attack as though it didn't have defender text, but I have really not liked the assault formations or the high alerts. This card feels like a replacement to those that helps me draw to something that's a little more on plan when, and it's been a little rare, the deck wins. It doesn't win these assault formation high alert games. It either Fear of Change, Ephemerate, pod up into some 8-drop that manages to win the game, or do the Pride of Hullclade into Emrakul thing, or sometimes people just don't read Pride of Hullclade and get hit by that. But I think this card is more on plan than trying to do the commandery assault formation high alert defenders shit.
And this creature itself does not have defender, so it can be a 3/3 for 1 extra mana.
Can be a 3/3 for 4. It's a hill giant if you believe. Hill Giant that draws 2 cards on ETB isn't the worst thing in the world. All right, Remand is now legal in Historic.
Right, we already had Reprieve, which is white Remand, but now blue players have it again. I don't think Remand's been seeing a lot of play in Modern for 10 years, but I'm not saying that this card isn't worth playing in Historic. There's probably some deck that's looking to bounce spells back to a hand and draw a card.
Yeah, Remand does actually counter the spell and is in blue where there's more competition. So Reprieve, I've played a fair bit of it when I've played white in Alchemy and Historic and Timeless. Nice card to have around. Those decks often can't cast Remand because Remand actually counters the spell. It can't stop something like a Supreme Verdict, but I've seen Blue-White Control in Historic, or Blue-White X Control in Historic also playing Reprieve. Those decks usually don't care that much about any spells that can't be countered, certainly not Verdict. So
how many blue decks are running any creatures at all if you're playing Control?
Oh, they're probably playing Flage now.
Okay, sure, but...
But yeah, this card will probably see some play. It's good to have in your toolbox.
Our next card is Temporal Manipulation for 3 generic, 2 blue. It says take an extra turn after this one at sorcery speed. So this card sounds a lot like Time Warp because it is, but those commander players can play both.
Place where you can't play both unless they make some change is Historic. Time Warp is banned there. Did you know that, Jeremy?
I did not know that. I have not studied this ban list well enough. Maybe they'll ban this one too. Maybe they won't. Who knows?
It's sort of a relic of an older, some would say better Historic that banned Time Warp. Doesn't really do anything in Timeless, but this is sort of a canary in the coal mine for if anyone other than me is paying attention to the format at all. Are they just going to let this card go? It would probably be fine. I don't think it's unplayable or anything. Taking turns is good. It is good when it's your turn. It's bad when it's your opponent's turn. If you can mitigate that to this degree, it is powerful. But is anyone watching the store?
Unban Dragon Rage Channeler from Historic. No, I don't know. Maybe not, but maybe. I think that it's not any better than some of the cards that
ban
from MH3.
Ban energy cards until Wizards is good again, and then unbuff Symmetry Sage.
And ban Yawgmoth. All right, anyway, back to our actual discussion of these cards. We get some popper icons with Thoughtcast, Seat of the Synod, and Vault of Whispers. So they are actually, to our knowledge, not completing the artifact lands, not basic, but like, single type untapped lands at the moment, just Seat of the Synod and Vault of Whispers.
Great Furnace Enjoyers in shambles.
Right, Great Furnace is the most powerful one of those in Pauper, but still, it would be nice to see the red, white, and green lands at some point. So,
do you remember what the white and green ones are called? Because I don't.
I don't know.
Without it in front of me.
I don't know what they're called either. I think the green one's a tree of some kind. I really don't remember.
I think the white one is Ancient Den.
Yeah, that sounds right. Ancient Den is more played than the green one.
Green one would be cool. I think both of us have tried at various points to brew Neoform Affinity in
Historic, yeah.
Historic, and
it's definitely cool. I mean, Neoform is completely taken over the Explorer queue with all of these people playing Oculus Neoform. But yeah, let's talk about these cards in front of us. Thoughtcast. Affinity for artifacts, draw 2 cards for 4 generic and a blue, but usually it costs a blue, especially now that you have access to Seat of the Synod and Vault of Whispers.
Yeah, and there's another reason why having the green artifact, Mirrodin artifact land, whatever its name is, we will never know. In Historic, that's technically 5 mana. This card beans.
That's true.
That's an Ancestral Recall, baby.
Right, yeah. I mean, people in Pauper always joke about deadly disputing your Ichor Wellspring being the Ancestral Recall in...
that costs 2 mana.
I know, right? That's not even...
I guess it gives you a treasure back.
Gets you a treasure back, so yeah. But yeah, these cards are really cool. I wonder, this is not at all... This is complete speculation. I have no idea. But later we're going to see some other Pauper cards that they're putting into Arena. I wonder if they're going to make some kind of format that's like the Pauper meta, like they're doing with Explorer right now, where they just release the Pauper meta into Arena. I would love this. I love Pauper. I mean, it'd still be expensive on Arena because you need to pay for your lightning bolts and junk like that, and your counter spell is only at rare, right? I don't know.
Yeah, they have done midweek Magic Historic Pauper, where it's cards that are on Arena
at Common, but not in any printing at Common.
With many cards that are banned in Pauper for good reason, just allowed to run wild. Cranial Ram, Mystic Sanctuary. I haven't seen Chatterstorm do anything in those queues, but it's there.
Right, and I'm not talking about what's actually common on Arena. I'm talking about actual Pauper meta. This is completely speculative. They probably will not do this, but I hope that they do this.
That would be cool. Be nice to be able to play on a not Magic online.
They would have to print my slivers from a long time ago in Common onto Arena, which they still haven't done. Print all the slivers onto Arena, please. All right, sorry, I'm getting too tangented. These cards, awesome for affinity type strategies, cheating out your Mirror Enforcers or refurbished Familiars. We even have Frogmite at Mythic. On Arena now.
I think we might have Frogmite at Common on Arena also.
Oh, sick.
But yeah, put those, if you're an affinity player, you're going to be eating good for a little while. Craft those, if you crafted those experimental, not experimental synthesizer. This is why I should put these cards on the slideshow if I want to talk about them. The one that...
Is it Simulacrum Synthesizer?
That's the one, Simulacrum Synthesizer. If you crafted those and were disheartened because they were bad, consoling yourself that you were only spending mythic wildcards, rejoice. Affinity's gonna be good in Historic, it looks like. If you are a non-affinity gamer or doing non-affinity gaming, even as a bit, put those, cast into the fires, meltdowns, whatever else, into your sideboards now.
Yeah, I think that people already have that stuff in their sideboard probably, but maybe they don't. Okay, next up is another popper banger, Balustrade Spy, 3 generic and a black for a vampire rogue, 2/3 with flying, but that's not the important part. When Balustrade Spy enters, target player reveals cards from the top of their library until they reveal a land card, then puts those cards into their graveyard. So this, in Pauper, is a combo with, what's the giant called again? Is it Lotleth? No.
Lotleth Giant is, I believe, how it wins, yes.
Yeah. So you put all of these creatures into your graveyard, and then
you get back, I think, 3, the jellyfish, the dredge card.
Right.
And then dread return out a Lotleth Giant and kill them. In Legacy, it does the same thing, except I think Legacy and I think Modern All Spells is a Balustrade Spy deck. I think those win with Thoracle. Dread Return, not on Arena, so you have to figure... So you aren't just going to mill over your... resolving this is not on its own going to win a game of Timeless, because you're not just going to mill over a Dread Return and do the thing. You need to have, like, at least a Reanimate in hand.
And then you need to have enough resources to cast that card.
There is a whole lot of fast mana in Timeless, though. Dark Ritual, you can pitch cast Grief and then sacrifice it to make 4 black mana. You can turbo this thing out really fast. Again, it's not a 1-card kill in Timeless. You do have to play a Belcher mana base, which is a little painful, but people do it. This card will probably do something.
Yeah, definitely a new combo card possible in Timeless especially. I think that probably more likely Timeless than Historic. Is Sacrifice banned in Historic?
Sacrifice is legal in Historic, but Grief is banned. So I don't know where you get the giant idiot.
Okay, we have Bob next. Dark Confidant, a generic and a black for Human Wizard, 2/1. At the beginning of your upkeep, reveal the top card of your library and put that card into your hand. You lose life equal to its mana value. So for all of our boomers out there, you remember a time when Bob was very playable in Modern and, you know, just that extra card
Legacy
draw.
too.
And Legacy too for a long time, yeah. This card was very powerful at drawing cards.
You can brainstorm so that you hit a land off your Bob. You can do that in Timeless if you want to. Of course, you're then playing a 2/1 that dies to Bowmasters.
Right, yeah. Nobody has played this this card for a long time because it's kind of been power crept out, not by its ability, but by other cards just having a great deal of power. Things with 1 toughness, unfortunately, are tough to play in any Bowmasters format. We see the same thing with Crucius in Timeless and Historic, while Bowmasters was still ruining that format.
I mean, I also had Crucius there because...
kind of does the same thing at the end step, but better.
Well, yeah, and thinking about what generic good stuff cards look like in Historic, there's Psychic Frog, who is Dark Confidant, but 2024 is just this unkillable thing, or unkillable to red removal and in combat thing that also draws you a card every turn and does every other thing that you could want. But like thinking about some of the generic good stuff, like Crucius, or if it's like a Rakdos or Jundi mid-range deck, your Crucius, you have some top end there. Bob's sort of this fragile thing that also kills you.
Right. I mean, in Standard even, we have Darkstar Augur, which essentially does the same thing, but you can also offspring it. It's a little more expensive. But there's so many ways to draw cards that don't just take huge chunks out of your life total. This card was great for a long time, though.
There was a time when Historic was an old folks' home for... It was also the alchemy cards and those sort of digital injections, but it really was an old folks' home for these beloved old cards that can't quite hack it anymore. That's not the Historic my experience with the historic format recently.
Yeah, I mean, in a sense, the MH3, it's MH3 with some nerfs. But what are you going to do, right?
One of the big MH3 decks in Historic, the Mardu version of Energy is a deck that's in black, is Luracy, so Bob won't kill you, but it's just fighting so hard for slots with so much competition.
Okay, up next, we have Gorex, the Tombshell. For 6 and 2 black, but as an additional cost to this spell, you may exile any number of creature cards from your graveyard. This spell costs 2 generic less to cast for each card exiled this way. And it's a 4/4 with Death Touch, and whenever it attacks or dies, choose a card at random, exiled with it, and put that into your hand. Well, its owner's hand, but which is yours.
It came out of your graveyard.
So into your
you
hand.
are its owner.
Right. So this is super delve.
Even if
for
you
creatures.
conjured it there with Replicating Terror, whatever the card we talked about
in the last Alchemy recap. Yeah. So this card is sort of interesting because of its super delve, but once it gets down, it really doesn't do anything. Like, a 4/4 for 2 black is powerful. I'm not going to say that it's not.
I mean, it will usually get to attack or die, right? It will usually do one of those things, so it'll usually get a card back. I kind of like this card, honestly.
Yeah. I mean, I think that it could be decent, of course, but I think it's going to have a little bit of trouble. But why don't you say some nice things about it?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it usually replaces itself. The super delve, but only for creatures, is I'm not sure how good that is. With our boy Hooting Mandrills, you're shipping away a lot of fast lands or fetch lands, or cheap instants and sorceries, and you're not really doing that here. You have to mill yourself a little harder. There are some pretty good cards for milling yourself, though. Stitcher Supplier, we've got Black Overlord, who, like this card, can be played for cheap, but beans might be something there. We've got the new Zur, who can tap to cast a zombie from the graveyard. Both Stitcher Supplier and Gorex are zombies. I think the big, I mentioned earlier, I don't know what large mana value black thing you're putting into play easily to sacrifice to play Spy in Historic. Maybe this is that thing. It has mana value 8. Cares about some of the same things. I think the most exciting thing for me about this is as a sort of fair delve beater, it usually replaces itself. It usually is putting at least one card back into your hand unless it immediately eats exiling removal.
Right. So I guess in Historic, it would have to attack to be exile removed unless you get Leyline Bound or whatever. But I think that there is potential in this card. Obviously, drawing a card off beans is always a bonus. But yeah, I don't know if this card is like great by any means, but it is fun and it does some good stuff.
I like turtles.
I like turtles. Okay, up next, another heroic card in Akroan Crusader for 1 red, 1/1. Human Soldier, heroic ability. Whenever you cast a spell that targets it, create a 1/1 soldier creature token with haste. So that's kind of fun, right?
This is a Pioneer Legal card that's new to Arena.
Right, so that's also... I don't know, the Boros lists that I've seen from Pioneer don't play it, but I could definitely see it as a sideboard card if you're worried about a ton of single target removal.
Yeah, I don't think it sees a ton of play in heroic decks. It's sort of a weirder card. I think it's seen some play in Pauper, or at least when we were trying to brew Pauper with a friend of ours. He latched onto Akroan Crusader being legal. I think it may have done something in Standard when it was last there.
Oh, definitely. Back in the day, it was played in Standard.
But yeah, it rewards sort of different things than the typical heroic decks. It wanting to reward you going wide is sort of a different thing than these other heroic prowess valiant threats that care about going tall. But yeah, it certainly does things. It poops out a bunch of bodies. We have cards like Ancestral Anger, which can trigger it in cantrip. We've got another red targeting cantrip, new to Arena through this jumpstart. Not legal in Pioneer, but legal in Historic and Crimson Wisps. If you can go wide enough, there are relevant payoffs. Convoke is what sprang to mind. You're sort of a spellslingery deck. Party Thrasher has been a pet card of mine since MH3 came out.
Right, and what's cool about Party Crasher is if you have enough one-cost red cantrips, is that these creatures all just become the mana to keep going off of the top of your deck. Obviously a little bit difficult because you're not targeting like Illuminator Virtuoso or something that lets you see more cards in case you ever hit a land, then you're kind of out of luck. But
Thrasher also specifically cares about cards that are cast from exile, which is a little more...
Oh, it has to be from exile.
Yeah, so you have to either...
exile them as well.
Either exile them with like a Reckless Impulse type effect, or maybe as your finisher, you can find a way to Madness Avacyn's Judgment. That was a thing that I was playing with in the sort of Boros space before the stock energy got really locked in early MH3, and this card goes pretty wide and might help you get there in some way, shape, or form. I don't know. Probably not an all-star, but a cool card to have in the formats that now have it.
Agreed. Okay, up next, I don't even know, how is that Ijane?
Anje, I think.
Anje Ravager is 2 generic and a red for Vampire Berserker 3/3 that attacks each combat if able. When it attacks, discard your hand, then draw 3 cards. But it can also be cast for its madness cost of a generic and a red.
So this is a card that has a reputation of being a pretty good beater in Vintage Cube, I believe. It is a reprint, but it's a reprint from, I think, Crimson Vow Commander. It's never been legal in any constructed format besides Legacy and Vintage, obviously, and that puts it sort of in the interesting jumpstart space. That's how we got Muxus on Arena in a jumpstart product. Still not legal in Modern, which I know is to the great distress of Goblin players there, but legal in Historic, and for a time quite good there. And here's a card that might be pretty good in Historic, I think.
Right, and like what Historic has that Modern doesn't have is Faithless Looting, right? So a good way of discarding this card for 1, and then, for 3 you've got this card out plus drawing 2 cards. It's powerful. I mean, there's plenty of discard outlets like FOMO, Inti, all sorts of ways. They print a new discard card from your hand into common every set, so there should be some way to discard this card.
Yeah, Mono Red Madness Hollow One decks used to be a pretty good budget option in Historic. They kind of fell off, but they got some stuff out of recent sets. There's Detectives Phoenix in MH3, which is also pretty good at getting your 3/3 swinging to discard your hand and draw 3 every turn. A thing that I love to do. I played a lot of Moonveil Regent when he was legal in Standard. He wasn't ever very good, but I love to discard my hand and draw 3 cards.
I mean, this seems powerful. I mean, especially in this hellbent sort of red strategy where you're trying to discard cards anyway. Why not? It seems like a lot of fun. Would be nice if it had haste, of course, but that might break it completely.
Detectives Phoenix can give it haste, maybe, right?
Right, sure.
It or your Hollow One or your FOMO. So it triggers off of in your mana base to get evidence is relatively free. Fiery Temper is also 3 evidence in the graveyard. Probably Phoenix has been pretty good in Hollow One and Modern. There's also Markov Baron, which is a card that I really like if you want to go for a more vampire convoke or vampire madnessy thing, which there's some support for. You can also convoke this thing down, so if you don't want to attack each combat, to convoke out the Baron.
That's nice. Yeah, cute. I guess you don't have to attack into certain death if it's not necessary. That is a decent strategy. I don't know if Markov Baron is a cool card, and it's still in standard, but a little hard at Madness 3 in Historic, I think. I mean, the Convoke helps, obviously, but still a little challenging probably to make work. But anyway, yeah, really cool card. Let's take a look at our next card, which is a couple of cards, actually. We have Dropkick Bomber shipping out to Boston over here with Goblin Warrior, 2/3 for 2 generic and a red. Other goblins you control get +1/+1, and then you can also, for a red, until the end of turn, another target goblin you control gains flying, and when this creature deals combat damage, sacrifice it. So you can whip your goblins into the air, and if that's a positive strategy in the Goblins Historic deck, I don't know, but maybe, I don't know. And then our other one is General Kreat, the Boltbringer, for 2 generic and a red as well, for a legendary creature Goblin Soldier. Whenever one or more goblins you control attack, create a 1/1 red goblin creature token that's tapped and attacking. So we see that a lot. But yeah, once again, General Kreat doesn't need to attack itself to trigger that ability. And then another ability, whenever another creature you control enters General Kreat, deals 1 damage to each opponent, and it's a 2/2. I don't know if I said that. So it's making goblins, it's dealing damage, as you know. I think the second ability is probably the better one, because you make infinite goblin tokens and they all ping. It seems pretty effective, but both cards at 3 mana, I just don't know if either of them slot in. I haven't ever played the Goblin deck in Historic, even when it was more of a top tier deck. But what do you think, Sam?
I mean, I'm also not enough of a Goblins player to say with any degree of certainty, but I think these cards are pretty comparable to the cards that Goblins currently play for Reach at their sort of below Muxus top end. Cards like Mons, cards like Sling Gang Lieutenant, these just sort of big or like kind of clunky, but you don't have to play very many because you can play Matron and just tutor them up when you need them. Cards that convert a big board full of goblins into an opponent being dead. So these are a little cheaper than Sling Gang, and they're not black, although I think there's not really a reason to want to be non-black in your goblins decks. Maybe for Cabaretti goblins or something, Cabaretti Rebels decks, but you have a land that tutor for if you're playing black, so I think Rakdos is probably the way to go there. Sling Gang converts existing goblins into the opponent being dead when it hits the board for no mana, which it probably more efficiently than these two, but they do stuff. They're of that caliber of 3 and 4 drop goblins.
Certainly these cards could win the game. And they're already like following the goblin archetype strategies and how you do that. So I definitely think that they could see some play, maybe even just one-ofs in a goblin deck. But yeah, cool. More pauper cards. We've got Goblin Bushwhacker, which is, one of the scariest cards in the Koldatha Rebirth decks in pauper right now. It's a 1 red for a 1/1 Goblin Warrior with Kicker. When this creature enters, if it was kicked, creatures you control get +1/+0 and gain haste until the end of the turn. So obviously we see this card just completely ending games in mono red Koldatha Rebirth piles. obviously in Historic, we also have Gleeful Demolition, and I think there's even another version of this card legal in Historic too, but I can't remember its name. It's okay, it doesn't matter. Yeah. You can find a way to make 3 Goblin tokens.
Yeah, I mean, Chatterstorm, Band, and Pauper are legal in Historic also. I didn't mention it here. You'd have to be in green, but there are a lot of ways to put out a lot of little shitters.
Right, so recently in Standard, we've seen cards like Imidane's Recruiter with this essentially the same text do a lot of work in sort of usually Boros decks because of you want the chance to make the knight tokens, and it's also been pretty easy to make little dudes with in Boros. But yeah, I don't know. I think this card is a great add and is also feeding my unreasonable belief that they may try and put competitive Pauper onto Arena, but probably not still.
Yeah, Recruiter and Leosaur, the existing wax in Historic are 3 mana. This is 2 mana, basically unconditional. Some people are going to get whacked right off in the Historic format by this card.
Seems inevitable. Okay, Goblin Rabblemaster. I definitely still have 4 copies of this card sitting over somewhere in my collection from when I played it in Standard back in the Cons days. I guess this one maybe came out right after Cons and Origins or whatever, but
sounds plausible. It's legal in Pioneer, but was not on Arena.
Yeah, I don't know. I love this card. It's probably not playable in any of the formats that we're talking about, but I had a lot of fun playing it back in the day when I was playing my red-green goblins pile in Magic Origins Standard.
Rabblemaster has seen some play in Pioneer, I think maybe in Modern, in not current Modern, obviously. Usually not in Goblin decks because it forces other Goblins to attack, but as just like aggro decks where it serves that army in a can role. Is it better than a card like Eidolon or in red Urbrask's Forge these days? I don't know, but it's here. It's cool. People think of it fondly.
People being me. All right, anyway, next card.
Here's a card that I think of fondly that is definitely not good enough to be playable in Historic. Mirrorwing Dragon, 5-drop, 4/5 dragon. Stop! You already had me. It has flying. Whenever a player casts an instant or sorcery spell that targets only Mirrorwing Dragon, that player copies that spell for each other creature they control that the spell could target. Each copy targets a different one of those creatures. So yeah, this card is a silly card. It's a fun build around. It's a commander card. If you put it in play with a bunch of other things, you can target it with a pump spell and do cool things. Your opponent can't target it with a Doomblade because they'll wreck their entire board. What they can target it with is a card you may have heard of or seen on the arena ladder, Galvanic Discharge. If your energy opponent looks at the big dumb dragon that you just spent 5 mana putting into play, cast Galvanic Discharge on it, they will target each of their creatures with a Galvanic Discharge. They will then choose to pay either 0 energy or maybe 1 energy if they want to kill a cat to flip their Ajani. And not only will they obliterate your poor dragon, they will also get a huge infusion of their deck's secondary resource.
And they don't even have to have enough energy when they cast it to kill your dragon. They will get enough energy banking off of their own creatures, off of the Galvanic Discharge, because of the way that the triggers resolve, that by the time that they're choosing how much energy to spend on your poor Mirrorwing Dragon, they will have infinite, right? So
yeah. card probably could have been omitted. It's here because I like it and because I thought that interaction was funny.
You can put whatever cards you want in the slide, Sam. It's okay. Okay, this is a fun card. Rampant Growth. Search your library for a basic land card. Put that card onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. So we've seen this sort of ability in other cards like Glimpse the Core. That one has to be a forest, where Rampant Growth can be any basic land card. Or then, there's, lots of ways to play additional lands on your turns, like Explore or Traverse Valley. But yeah, just a cool addition. Has this card not been on Historic Legal before this?
Nope. We have not had actual factual Rampant Growth on Arena, and now we do.
Yeah, probably once again more for the Commander players, but cool to have it in your arsenal as a possibility. Okay, this is a fun card. I think it's Scythecat Cub.
Yes, that's right.
For a colorless and a green, for a cat, a powerful creature type. It's a 2/2 with trample and landfall. Whenever a land you control enters, put a 1/1 counter on target creature you control. If this is the second time this ability has resolved this turn, double the number of 1/1 counters on that creature instead. So this is better Bristly Bill, realistically, where you don't need to pay the 5 to double the counters. I mean, I guess you may, in these decks, you may want some of both, but
it's also non-legendary.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. The non-legendary aspect, definitely a bonus. I really like Landfall Zoo. I used to, back when it was not viable back then either, but 10 years ago, I used to try and play a Landfall Zoo modern deck. That was like right on the cusp of Summer Bloom being banned, so that was powerful. But yeah, like Scape Shift and silly shenanigans to get a million landfall triggers entering and then winning the game that way. But yeah, this card's really cool. We've seen some new landfall cards recently to give this guy a home, like we were talking about Bristly Bill, but now there's that new Mossborn Hydra, which we'll talk about in our regular green set review of Foundations, that also doubles its 1/1 counters on itself.
You know what's good with doubling? More doubling. Literally exponentially good. So Mossborn Hydra is a little big, or a little expensive for... We're probably talking about a timeless card. Landfall tends to be about twice as good in fetch formats. There's Vista in Historic, but we're probably talking about trying to force this card in timeless, and 3 is a little bit of a tough sell, but if you can double and then double again, that's pretty good. Another sort of pet brew that we were working on, based on a spike deck from Modern, is trying to do Pyro Surfer type things in go wide, Atarka aggro landfall with the usual sort of little payoffs. Bowmasters, just because it goes wide. Bowmasters does actually play reasonably well with this card because you get a little bit extra out of doubling the counters on the army. There's stuff going on here.
Print Renin 6 into Historic. I don't think that's a problem. It barely sees Modern play, right? I don't know. That would be fun for my landfall brews. But yeah, I think that this card is cool. I'd like for I don't know, if nowhere else, I will attempt to play in Standard in a landfall deck. I'll try it somewhere. I'll find a home.
This card isn't
Standard legal, but Mossborn Hydra, Bristly Bill, and the Lizard are all legal.
Shroofus Sproutsire. Fun to say. Legendary creature Saproling, 2 and a green, a 1/1. So far, so bad. Whenever a Saproling you control deals combat damage to a player, create that many 1/1 green Saproling creature tokens. So that's a good, fun block of text. There is an unblockable Saproling that's playable in... it's legal in Historic.
Legal. Playable.
My poor boy Changeling
As
Outcast.
much as both of us want this card to be playable, it is unfortunately a hard find.
It's also a card that I've seen a little bit on the Timeless ladder in Fungal Infection. Target creature gets -1/-1 till end of turn, create a Saproling.
By Ragavan.
Yeah, if it kills something, it's pretty good. But yeah, obviously the pieces aren't there to really turn this on.
Yeah, your Colony Garden needs a pump.
Colony Garden's not a Saproling, it's a plant.
Oh, it's a plant? I thought
it also
was a
can't
Saproling.
Deal combat damage because it's a 0/1.
Yeah, I
you
was
create
say it needs
0.
to be pumped, but it also needs to be a changed creature type. So yeah, this is a difficult card to make work. But yeah, maybe some Commander player will figure that out. But I am not that Commander player. So let's move on to our next card, which is Slimy Piper. Generic and a green for a Fungus Bard 2/1. Whenever Slimy Piper attacks, it gets +1/+1 until the end of turn. If you control 4 or more creatures, it gets +2/+2 and gains indestructible until the end of the turn. So if you can have a bunch of dudes out making a 4/4, a 4/3 indestructible, this is okay, right? I mean,
4/3 indestructible for 2, I'm comfortable saying, is a pretty good rate in Pauper if it's always that. It obviously isn't always that, but there are a lot of ways to put a lot of dudes in play for not that much mana in Pauper.
Right, I mean, I could see playing this card alongside one of the most powerful new cards, Writhing Chrysalis, which we didn't put on. It does actually, in fact, to get you there.
Oh, yeah, right. Why am I putting Glimpse the
Portling Outburst? Who's plays that card? Yeah.
I'm just looking for cards that are legal in Pauper and say tokens on them. But yeah, Writhing Chrysalis is also more of a reason to be green in your tokens deck instead of just doing the Koldatha thing. It is a Pauper legal card. It is new, has never been printed before.
There's so much you want to be doing on turn 2 in any deck playing Writhing Chrysalis that's not playing this card, but I could see it. I'm not totally saying that this card is not playable. A little bit of a tough sell, but yeah, for sure. It's silly and I love the art on it too. Little mushroom dude. Okay, up next we have Bloom Tender. This is a reprint, obviously.
It's a pretty old one, though. It's not legal in Pioneer, legal in Modern.
But yeah, so this is a colorless and a green for a 1/1 with it's a tap for each color among permanents you control. Add 1 mana of that color. So I guess if you have Leyline of the Guild Pact or whatever down, it's 5 mana, or any any way of having all of them down. 5 mana is a decent tap. But when we look at other dorks of the same ilk, we have things like Fanatic of Ronus, which for Ferocious, if you control a creature with power 4 or greater, you just get to add 4 green, which is usually all you want anyway. Obviously, if you're trying to play Wooburg things, maybe Bloom Tender is a little bit more appealing. But then we've got Sanctum Weaver, which is the enchantments color. That all has to be the same color. But yeah, I don't know. I don't really see a home for this card. I don't know if it was ever played in Modern.
Not as far as I know. It's one of those cards that's bad, but bad in kind of an interesting way. Fanatic of Ronus sees play in Historic Green Devotion. Sanctum Weaver is a card that's sort of always around for these Enchantressy decks. Both of those cards do play sometimes, but both those decks might sometimes play Leyline of the Guild Pact. There's also no Scion of Draco on Arena. There's not as much reason really to be playing Leyline of the Guild Pact. This card is also a lot more fragile than Fanatic of Ronus, which has 4 toughness.
Yeah, the one toughness is a pretty significant downside to this card.
Last but not least, Violent Outburst, banned in Modern. Now on Arena. Also on Arena is Crashing Footfalls, not on Arena Force of Negation. So the play pattern that got it banned in Modern, where you can just fire it on your opponent's end step with Force backup, isn't around. You do have Mystical Dispute on Arena, which is Violent Outburst compliant and can help protect it. Was a card that people played in Temur Rhinos. It is the only good Cascade card on Arena. No Shardless Agent, no Ardent Plea. It is just this thing. And if you want another Cascade, you want a redundant Cascade card, you need to play something like Bloodbraid Elf or Itali's Favor, both of which can hit other 3-drops besides Violent Outburst. Itali's Favor also makes you play like these weird sort of Cascade compliant token producers like Steady Tortoise or White Virtue, and having that higher threshold means no Bone Crusher Giant. You know, we did talk about Cursed Abattoir, or not Cursed, it's
Crude
Abattoir the other week in Duskmorn Alchemy, which does dodge Itali's Favor and Bloodbraid Elf, but it seems like a puzzle how to build the Rhinos deck.
Right, because we were talking about the Raptor, the Energy Raptor, as how people are doing Crashing Footfalls now before this card came out, but you can't play both.
They play the Raptor and then they play a Bloodbraid Marauder, the 2-mana Delirium Cascade guy.
So that's a little tricky to run in this. I mean, an instant in your graveyard is not amiss, obviously, in looking for Delirium, but you don't want to risk it all necessarily.
Yeah, it seems hard to play this card in your Raptor deck. You need to bank energy or it's just a miss for Raptor.
If it hits this card instead, yeah.
And I think these are sort of
conflicting decks.
Two divergent ways to build Rhinos. And a Violent Outburst power level is obviously there.
Maybe need some more enablers or another 3-cost true Cascade card to seal the deal. But I'm sure that we'll see people trying to play this card into Rhinos one way or another. All right. Well, thank you for listening. Remember to like, subscribe, comment, all that stuff if you listen through the whole video. We are Hooting Mandrills. Have a good one.